both Memes of Destruction and MCJK as well, but at this minute in time that they haven't seemed to have turned up just yet. But I am here with Lonely Wolf, so hopefully if MC and Memes do turn up, then they should be able to come into the stream straight away and we should be able to continue the conversation. That all being said. So yeah, I'm here with Lonely Wolf. So first of all, Lonely Wolf, why don't you introduce yourself? Because most people know who I am. They wouldn't be here otherwise.
Hello, I'm Lonely Wolf 1980. So I have my own channel. So primarily I'm sort of in this discussion. So I'm kind of representing maybe the left side of the debate and just the problem of why we can't seem to have agreement where we should be able to, have polite conversations with people we don't necessarily agree with. And so, yeah, I have my own channel. Mostly it's a music channel, but I do a bit of like political talk or whatever.
No, that's fine. I mean, you mostly like doing at this minute in time some of those covers that you like doing at the minute, don't you?
Yeah, I love making because I do mainly keyboard covers. So I've kind of learned how to do split screens because I mainly use a piano sound, but when I want to use other music effects, I record them in another layer. So I've figured out how to do a split screen, so it shows me playing the other layers as well.
No, that's fair enough. I mean, I suppose we should get straight into topic, I imagine.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the reason why I picked the people that I did to be able to come on is because I'm friends with all of the people that are here anyway, or should be here as well. So it's a contradiction in itself that at least me considering myself as a conservative would be able to have friends such as Effeminate Degenerate or Lapis, and I do classify her as a friend, even though that she may not, yourself, and so many others as well that I would classify as liberals or left-leaning people. Simply because, just because that you may disagree with me on a particular section or comment or idea, doesn't mean that they're bad people and doesn't mean that they're people that I don't want to listen to. I imagine that's probably something similar to the reason why you might hold me around, Lonely Wolf, or something like that.
Yeah, because I'm going to be brutally honest. It's most of my social spheres. So I mean, I've got my political spheres where I've got accounts that I follow, and I'll retweet or I might have political discussions with them or whatever. But in terms of the actual friendships or whatever, or the social groups, I tend to try to separate these two out. So it just so happens that most of the people that I'm sort of mostly friends with, and we have a lot of other interests in common, they happen to be on a different political plane than I am. But at the same time, it's, if you approach the conversations the right way, when we do start talking politics or sometimes, then, obviously they're the sort of people who aren't too entrenched in their own ideology, so that you can sort of present your opinions and you can present things they may not like, but they're not going to hold them against you.
No, I think that's very true. I mean, one of the reasons why I wanted to do the streaming itself was for two reasons. One of the reasons is because I think that because we're polarizing ourselves, I think we do that from identity politics in its own identity anyway, or own aspects. It's just natural that if you identify this way, then you're going to be opposed to other people that are identified as an enemy, so to speak. So I just think that's a natural progression, and I think that naturally pushes people further apart from each other. So I wanted to try and bring people back together again. Because just as I said in the intro, just because we may disagree on healthcare, or just because we disagree on border control, for instance, not saying we do, but just in case, doesn't mean that we still can't be friends. Because we have to understand each other's views. But the way that I wanted to approach this was because I know that when in real life, for instance, when I started espousing some of the views that I did to some of my friends, they would distance themselves from me. They may not engage with me so much as I was speaking. And obviously, I'm nowhere near as forthright as I would be on a YouTube channel when I'm speaking to people out in public, because you can actually get hurt. But my point was that even though that it was still an aspect, as soon as people realized that you were a certain way, And I don't mean the racist kind of way that people perceive certain right-leaning people to be, or the communist people that the left people are perceived to be. But it seems that they left. They just left me. I don't know why. It's like some of my closest friends that I had that were liberals before, when I started saying, well, I don't like Jeremy Corbyn, I don't like his policies, and I don't like this, and I don't like that, it was a case of, well, okay, well, you're not friends with me anymore. And it's just like, but why? Like we go out and drink every weekend.
Oh, it's ridiculous, isn't it? I mean, I've never seen it like it's never ever been like that in the history of our own lifetimes, because it used to be that you'd probably go to the pub and you'd have a banter about it, and you'd get you might have a drinking competition. Like every time you say something retarded, then you have to take a drink or something. If you yeah, it was always something like that. And even myself, and I think it goes deeper than just saying, okay, liberals and conservatives, why can't they talk to each other? Because the problem is actually political discussion as well, because I'm seeing the left, divided into its own factions. We saw that with the presidential debates that they had on CNN. And this is the thing, there's people on the left who are sort of, like I've been unfriended with people, who might be further left than what I am, and they've got a different standard of political correctness, because I believe that, I don't really follow the PC ideology. Like, I don't necessarily think that language is inherently harmful, as long as there's limits on that. But, generally, if I'm on Discord or if I'm in a private chat, then I talk a lot differently. Like, I don't care if it's there are jokes that are politically incorrect, because they're inherently funny and we all have a dark side. But I had someone like a fellow leftist who unfriended me on YouTube because, I posted a meme about it was a blind person. It was basically a pilot. So it was saying this is the worst Halloween costume for a pilot, and it was like the pilot coming into the cabin with a walking stick and sunglasses on. And I was thinking that's a really funny joke, like in the context of fear of flying, because if you see the the pilot walking out with the stick and whatever, and with the glasses, saying, okay, bad Halloween costume for a pilot. And then someone came into my mention saying, oh, that's, ableism is not funny. Disabilities are not funny. And I'm thinking, well, first of all, if you can see this, it really doesn't affect you. And, and a blind person's not going to see the joke. So why are you getting offended? And why would you go around telling, blind people about it? You're just going to hurt their feelings if they're... I don't get that. And then it wasn't soon after that I just discovered, oh, that person unfriended me because I made this joke.
No, I completely get what your point is on that one, and I do find that so interesting and funny that people will get offended for other people. Now, I've got a couple of Muslim friends, and they are from Middle Eastern descent, and I will call them racist names, but not in a way that it's meant to be racist. It's meant to banter and joke and take the piss out of them and how other people would perceive them to be. And don't get me wrong, I am one of the apparently most redneck racists, apparently according to them, as much as possible, and the banter continues in the circle. But I've had so many people outside of that circle, of me and some of my Muslim friends, that have come in and gone, why are you being so racist to them? It's like, I'm not. I'm literally talking to them and having a joke and a laugh with them. They don't drink, so I take the piss out of them for not drinking. I then will say when I'm a little bit more drunk, sand monkey and things like that, because I'm joking with them, not because I think that they are, and so on and so forth. And they'll call me white honky and so on and so forth. But that's the way that it should be.
Okay, you need handing you a banjo.
That's what ding, ding, ding. But that's the way it should be.
But it's personal. This is a social exchange and an interaction, because they're probably busting your balls. You're probably giving them a hard time. And like, why does it have to be other people's business? Like the way that people interact with each other on a personal level. And that's it's a certain authoritarianism that I mean, even though I'm from within the left, I do oppose that sort of, that nannying and that sort of coddling and that sort of, I guess, people wanting to have control over I guess, the personal, because they sort of say, okay, the personal is political or whatever. But there are situations where you're going to say a lot of things that you don't necessarily believe, but it's going to be part of a banter when you're with other people, and you're not going to go. I mean, I know that you're not a awful person, so you're not going to go up to a random Muslim person and start saying names like that. It's because you got these particular friends, so we're going to censor ourselves according to what environment we are, and that's been the rules. It's nothing to do with politics. It's etiquette.
No, I'm with you. I'm completely not with you. It's, as Shirai says, ding, 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 ding. It's to do with all of your friends and so on.
Yeah.
Now, I wouldn't, as you said, I wouldn't go off and I wouldn't go and say, "Hey, I think you're this," or "I think you're that" to somebody random, because then it's not a joke. That's an opinion I have of somebody that I've never even spoken to. But that's just ridiculous, and in itself is bigotry and is prejudice. It just is, because you don't know what that person is, what they've gone through, and so on and so forth. Now, I think going back to the topic, it's not because, as what you said before with some of your friends, where they are trying to, should we say, not necessarily police language, and I don't want to use it as such, but people will assume it as, but police the jokes that they actually are saying, because they want to take and defend people that they think can't defend themselves.
Yeah, I think sometimes you're denying agency, because I find it very ironic. We're agreeing way too much for people who are opposed. But anyway, the problem that I find with that is that obviously it seems to be denying agency, and I think they're guilty of tokenization as much as, because that meme they always say, or always the tweet saying, okay, just because you have a black friend, it doesn't mean that you're not racist or whatever, and it doesn't mean you're not doing that. But the same thing applies to them, because I've always thought that when you say the word people of color, I just think that's kind of racist in a way. I mean, what's the difference between doing that and saying, okay, let's talk about the coloreds?
Exactly.
Like, there's absolutely no difference. And then if you actually say to one of those people, maybe you shouldn't say the word people of color, and they said, oh no, that's acceptable. And I said, who told you that? And they said, oh, a black friend. And I say, oh, so you have a black friend too? Well, why should I listen to you?
You have a black friend, you can't be racist.
Yeah. And so they're sort of and yeah, I think it's a very poor defense to say, okay, this black person told me that I could do this or this one. I mean, sometimes it has validity, but I think we tend to use those as weapons. And if the left thinks that they're my side, I mean, it's the identitarian side of it, because I'm left wing in terms of economic policies or whatever, and certainly like the rights for pro trans people, and
Sure.
And I've got the sort of I'm one of those people who thinks that gender and sex is a little bit more complicated or whatever. So those things, but the general political correctness, or I don't really follow that in particular.
No, I mean, that's fair enough. I mean, I do think that it's politics in itself, as day night day set, or die night nater day, or basically Nita, whatever. I'll post it so people can actually see it. Rather, there we go. That person said that, which is, why can't we be friends? Because people kill each other for politics and power. People kill each other for a loaf of bread if necessary. But yeah, you are completely and utterly correct that we find differences to be able to accept the reasons why we can dislike those people. And especially nowadays in our political struggle, so to speak, it's a case of we use that differences to be able to other the other people, and all sides do this. So it's not a left versus right. It's almost every side does it in an aspect. Well, this person says this, so they are this. I don't have to engage with them at all for anything ever again. Even if the person that was saying something wasn't saying anything directly to them. And that's just the way humanity is. We try and do things as quickly as possible to try and negate other people's opinions, especially when they contradict with what our own thinking and ideology is. At least that's the way that I've noticed certain people, at least, should we say, on the right side of politics are. And I think you've kind of suggested on the same on your side, so to speak.
what I'm seeing from that is a similar thing. It's like the ease at which, I mean, what I found really contradictory was the sort of the because the left was criticized for saying this is racist, for using that card, and that is a very weak thing, especially it's obviously designed in some cases it's true, but in some cases it doesn't really add to the conversation. You've just shut down the whole thing and put up a wall, and there's really no further engagement you can have. But then sometimes, when I see the other one, like the SJW, even conservative people I don't know have said, oh, SJW, because why? Because you thought that, maybe it's rude to ask a trans person about their genitalia. That's what a lot of people got into an argument with about that. And we said, well, it's nobody's business, so don't be an asshole like that. And then all of a sudden they said, oh, you're an SJW, you're a feminist, you're this. And I'm thinking, you're taking this huge slippery slope from what was said and what the argument was, and then tried to group it because, maybe we're not good at dealing with ambiguity. Because that's what I really find. Like the minute they sort of, that's why centrists often get lumped with right wingers. Like they never ever talk about how they can be tied to the left and how they can ally with the left. They always get lumped in with the right, and I think it's because there's a difficulty because centrists are difficult to figure out because we don't know where they stand. So when we can't pin people down, and we love to categorize because I think it's a cognitive coping strategy, and we're more comfortable. Yeah, I think we're comfortable when we know who that person is and what their position is. But when we can't really pin them down, then we have to attack them somehow. And
No, you're completely correct. The word that you're looking for is a schema. Is that we as humans are designed and use a process called a schema, which is designed to be able to make us have quick, snappy decisions about somebody. So if we see somebody in a hood, for instance, it doesn't matter if what their color is, for instance. But if we see somebody in a hood that's in a group, our quick schema is to judge them as a hostile threat until we can establish what they're actually doing, which is why we would always worry more about somebody that's wearing a hood than somebody that's wearing jeans and a shirt, even though they could equally be the same person and have equally the same disposition and trying to hurt you. But because we have a schema that makes that person look to us that they're more of a danger, we then put that person as a higher priority to watch them more rather than the opposite. So, no, I'm completely and utterly with you on that. I would jump on something that Ain't Jack said in the chat, which is categories are useful, and that is why we use them. It's correct. We do. We do use them as categories to be able to categorize people, the way things are, and everything else like that. We're human. That's what we do. We naturally categorize things. But those categories, even though that we put them into place, don't define the person as who they are. As Lonely Wolf has said, he's more of a left-leaning person when it comes to economics. I'm very right-wing when it comes to economics, but I'm also very left-wing when it comes to social thinking and ideas. To me about economics, then people would think that I'm an all-out capitalist, even though I would support a form of taxation and a form of social healthcare and social welfare. But yeah, because they would focus on that aspect of capitalism, I'd be classified as a capitalist. Categories are great for quick decisions, but when it comes to talking about people and what their ideas are, categories don't really define what the person actually thinks. You have to talk to them.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's there's got to be some sort of we've always had categories. We've always identified ourselves with groups, but at the same time, I think what's changed is the dogma that we associate with that particular label, and I think that people have lived their identities, and I see the same thing with LGBT people or trans people, and especially I'll see that with other people who identify sort of outside the gender binary. It's like, even though I've sort of spoken at length about my own experience with dysphoria or whatever, sort of it's to put it mildly, like I haven't wanted to change sex, or anything like that. Like I've never wanted that. Like I kind of learnt to live as a man, but at the same time, it's sort of like it's an abstract form of transsexualism. So that's really,
Mm.
when we're talking about those situations like non-binary or whatever, we're talking about a very abstract idea that kind of like imaginary numbers if you're talking mathematics, because people see the, the real number system, but then the imaginary numbers are things that, might not exist in the material reality, but they still have their utility. So that's kind of the argument that I put forward. But it's because we don't need to get into an argument with the chat about like attack helicopter jokes and all that. But the problem that I think the problem we have is that I see a lot of content being made by people who fit into that category that I guess I'm not really sure, the gender benders or whatever we call ourselves. Whereas they
I'd like
attach
to clarify. I don't think that a lot of people actually say that people that are dysphoric are gender benders. I think, and then again, maybe it is my own personal opinion on that one. I think a lot of people that I've spoken to that use that term use gender benders for the people that don't actually have gender dysphoria, that are classifying themselves as transgender when they're not.
Yeah, it's sort of like it's something that affects people's lives, but what really I think what concerned me was the way that people use these categories, and that became the definition of who they were as people. And that was one of the explanations of as why it was so hard to relate to some of those people. I mean, even I feel confused, like even though I'm kind of I kind of distanced myself from that LGBT community because I couldn't really get along with people who sort of put that as the first and foremost part of their identity. And the idea that like when they respond to, like, let's say that there's someone who says, okay, there's only two genders, only two sexes, get over it. Like when I see something like that, I just think, okay, that's somebody who has a different opinion than me. That's the most logical thing that I think of. But then the reaction of that is that this particular tweet has erased my identity. This has erased me as a person. And that is a very extreme response. It's like it's sort of showing that you're putting that in front of your own sense of self, like some sort of gender label in front of yourself. And I sort of have an internal disagreement with other people on the left, because people say, "Oh, like Lonely Wolf, you're giving too much ground, like you're sort of conceding too much or whatever. Like you shouldn't be compromising." But unfortunately, like I'm not going to believe that just because there's a tweet that might disagree with an opinion on gender, that doesn't mean that I can be erased. I mean, I've always been taught, and things like that. I've always been taught to think that, okay, the only person who can erase my identity is me. Like I'm the only one who has that power to do that. So by making a statement like that, you're conceding power to other people's opinions, which is, it's not healthy, I don't think.
No, I mean, I completely agree with you on that one. I do think that, I think this goes on the right and the left. I think it's more prevalent on the left, but it does affect people on the right as well, where it becomes a point of, if you attack my idea, somehow you're managing to attack my identity. And put identity and stock in that identity or worldview into their idea of what is going on, and they're not ready to have that idea challenged, because that idea that's being challenged to them is actually challenging their whole identity and actual whole worldview. At least that's the way that I see it. Or for some people, again, not everyone, but I do think it's more prevalent on the left than on the right. I mean, would you say that that's something that you've...
Yeah. There's I think identity politics is sort of it manifests itself on many sides. So I think there is identity politics. It's useful. Even the term intersectionality has its own use, like in the academic sense. But what I'm opposed to is the distortion of those ideas that have led us to conclusions that don't really make a logical sense. And that if you look at this idea, you think, okay, this is not making sense to me. So, if you have to use so much word salad and mental gymnastics, then maybe you might be on the wrong track in the way you're applying this. So maybe you need to pull it back and reconsider the models you're using for, identity politics. And yeah, there is an element of identity politics, but it's not, I don't like the way that it's used as a weapon in some way. But unfortunately, like when I hear I hear some discussions from maybe the right or sort of the anti-SJWs They might talk about someone else. They'll say that, Milo Yiannopoulos, he's a Jew, he's a gay man, he sucks black dicks, and the dude who got milkshaked, this is an Asian and a gay man. So I'm not sure what it is. I think it might be a response to the left doing this, and then I think it needs to be dropped by everyone, sort of, because it seems like we're prefacing our conversations by saying, as this person, as this, as this.
That's
so
true.
It's almost saying that our opinions aren't going to be valid unless there's a certain arbitrary characteristic we have for each other. And I think that's a very dangerous line of thought, because it's sort of making the assumptions. It's a very cynical view of humanity, because it's assuming that if we don't belong to a group, then we don't have the power to empathize with that or to have common ground with them.
No, that's fair enough. No, I do think that, especially when it comes to, as you said, the right do this as well quite a lot now, with trying to say and preface it, they're trying to fight identity politics with identity politics while saying identity politics is stupid. And it's just like, okay, well, if you think that, then why the fuck are you using identity politics to fight against it? You don't use fire to fight a fire, you use water or sand. You try and use something else rather than the actual thing that you're fighting against. At least that's the way that I look at it. But I do think that all politics at this moment in time seems to be so driven by identity and bannership. That, I am a conservative. Okay, well, what form of conservatism are you in? And let's subcategorize that. And then let's subcategorize the subcategory. What form of communism do you like? Do you like Leninism? Do you like Marxism? Do you like Stalinism? That type of thing. There's so many categories that are in categories that are in categories that nobody really is actually in a group anymore. And they seem to be targeting their own selves in their own groups, which seems to be weird to me.
I've seen. I mean, the left is going through the left is going through a major kind of. It's a lot of things. It's almost like it's not. I wouldn't compare it to the internet blood sports. It's kind of. I think the one thing that I prefer about the left is they kind of have a bit more class and actually sorting out that blood sports, doing it behind the scenes.
Yeah. But that's the thing, though. I mean, I think that's where we're trying to come from at this moment in time. At least that's why I think that we're trying to bridge this divide or gap. And I know that's really pretentious to actually say on a stream between just two people. But I do think that conversations like this do go a long way to be able to bridging the understanding. We disagree on a hell of a lot. And we don't need to go into the disagreements, so to speak. But on the stuff that we do agree, we can work together on. And what's wrong with that if we disagree on certain ideologies? Why can't people work together if they disagree on other aspects?
Yeah, because it almost reminds me of people who, like, sometimes we need to consider ourselves as independent contractors in a lot of ways. So, that's how I approach. Let's say it's a group like feminism. Like, I don't necessarily want to be part of that group because there's too much toxic stuff in that group. But at the same time, like, if it comes to, like, I'm heavily pro-choice, and I'm also for education, so I want to see like better funding for education, because I think there's a lot of unpaid labor that goes into the education industry with teachers, and I think they're not getting a very good deal. And it just so happens that those people are primarily women. So, I sort of see myself as an independent contractor who'll just sort of go into that particular, area and just say, okay, this is I agree with you on this, so I'm going to retweet you on like these particular points there because I think they're important. And that's the same with liberals and conservatives. As individuals, we can consider ourselves also as independent contractors. So for this particular cause, so let's say that there's the Charlottesville riots, then there's a time where we should have the capacity to work together on that particular issue. Or if it comes to the extreme right, we obviously are probably going to agree that those things are not good, so we need to sort of have a time to work together on those. And I saw it before, like after Charlottesville, I actually had hope that there'd be a certain bridging of the gap, because Ben Shapiro, I mean, like the way that he said it, and Ted Cruz, like these are people that I wouldn't really agree with, but when I heard their take on the alt-right and that sort of identitarianism on the right, they sort of had the right idea. And and with Ben Shapiro, like most of the stuff I don't like, but then when he talks about the reason that he's not a big fan of Donald Trump, that he'd rather have somebody else in the Republican Party, then I sort of think, okay, well, you're saying exactly what I've been saying. So, I think we have pride.
Yeah. No, but that's
So,
the thing. I do think something that let me just get the person National Yorkshireman says, which is a very good point. Which is, I did blow it up so people could read it as well. Which there's a fine line between infighting and keeping your side in check. The latter is perfectly fine. And I completely and utterly agree with him. I hope that some people who have been watching my channel have been able to see some of the videos and would be able to see that I've been trying to keep my side in check a little bit more, because I've been saying it quite often. If I'm only going to let my enemies, so to speak, if I'm going to go down that road, keep us in check, then all it is giving them fuel for the fire, because nobody else is actually going out of their way to say, well, this is stupid or whatever. And vice versa for people that are on the left, I beg them to go and do exactly the same. Because then when you have somebody like Jessica, the trans person who wanted to have her balls waxed and whatnot, when you have people like her that are coming out and saying these things, they use the scapegoats. Because don't get me wrong, I completely and utterly dislike everything that she has done, and she's probably a paedophilic person in the way that she's done everything. Does that mean all trans people are? No, fuck no, it doesn't. Does that mean all the left support her and everything that she's done? Fuck no, of course it doesn't. But some people are using it as such because it's to do with identity. And I mean that in a nice way. If you're... Sorry, I just wanted to finish this point. Ellen, please carry on. But if you're going to use her as a point of all the people on the left, or all of the people that are trans, or all of the people on that aspect, then you don't have an argument when the left go, well, all white supremacist terrorists are now on the right. You don't have an argument for it because you're playing that game. Sorry.
Yeah, that's the it's kind of it's a dissonance, because it's sort of, it really betrays like what the and it's this kind of distinction that people make. They say that, the people on the right, it's the supremacy of the individual, and then people on the left, it's a collective group identity or whatever. That's often a big point of contention. And I'm one of those people that thinks that there's a healthy balance between this, because I think that some of the politics I've seen on the left has really, I think it's become very distorted. And so they've talked about, group identities or whatever, and in such a way they've really rigidified this ideology. And I think it sort of needs to be reevaluated to sort of reflect reality a bit, and to sort of respect that there's an individuality as well that has to be respected. And that's where I sort of agree a little bit more on the right, when I sort of think we need to view people as, just as people, rather than as members of the group. But by the same token, like, we can't sort of have people they've attacked feminism because they've sort of said, okay, not all men, do that, because they criticize feminists for generalizing men, and or for generalizing white people and decrying that sort of that groupthink, ascribing a group identity to the individual, based on the actions of a rapist or a murderer or whatever. But by the same token, I see a bit of hypocrisy when, like, when this really disgusting trans woman, is a pervert and pedophile and harassing all these waxing salons, and then sort of thinking, okay, this is a deranged person. But then I've seen a lot of this sort of sea lining of the trans people or leftists or whatever saying, as a trans person, what do you have to say about this? And I'm thinking, well, aren't you the one who fought against that, saying that just because I'm a man doesn't mean that I should be lumped in with the things that, a group of men have done? It's like, no, we can't have both things.
No, I'm completely with you. That's why I was using the term of white supremacist as a terrorist, because when we had Christchurch, they were saying, oh, because this person's right-leaning, oh, all these people now that are right-leaning are contributing to him being this way. It's like, okay, you're fighting against this because you're saying that individuals make their own decisions and so on and so forth. Fine. But you can't then argue against it, trying to say that, well, because this person identifies that way, then all of the people that identify that way are that way. It's to quote Sargon of Akkad, you can't have a group of individualists and then expect the group to have one singular identity. And as retarded as that sounds, it actually makes sense in this context.
Yeah. And I think one of the biggest issues, it's kind of the entry. One of the things that I've tried to introduce is like I've tried to subvert. Obviously, I'm a leftist, so I want people on my side. Okay, so often I'm hearing this thing saying, okay, this person is a pipeline to the far right. Like no matter where it is, like they seem to think that even if it's just a little bit of, even if it's left of center, whatever, they're saying, well, this idea is going to lead to this thing. This is going to lead to that, and there's a pipeline there. But I'm trying to disrupt that narrative because I think it makes more sense to get people on my side if I say, well, look at Siobhan Head over there. Like she made this argument for trans people, so shouldn't we be treating her as a pipeline to the left so that the people who follow her sort of narrative, then maybe someone who's a little further left, they might pick those people up and saying, okay, welcome to the end of Shoes train. Like it's left, it's kind of ended towards the left. So maybe there's people who want to pick them up and sort of take them closer to their goalposts if they so wish. Then I don't see why, like we're not using the term pipeline to the left. And that's why I try to use it on Twitter to say that, yes, like some of the ideas that are made by people we might have associated with as shitlords who are very popular, and they might have right-wing followers, but I'm thinking, okay, if we're picking up those left-wing and dog whistles as well, like I try to use that term to say, oh, you just made a left-wing you made a left-wing dog whistle when you defended this person or when you've said that. So what that's sort of doing, it's kind of a strategic thing on my part, is to sort of suggest that maybe some people are a little bit more on the left than what they'd like to admit.
No, I mean, I completely agree. I mean, especially with Siobhan Head. I mean, she's literally supporting Bernie Sanders. So she can't be any further left, and in that aspect, for Democrats at least. So, yeah. Yeah. But I do think that's really interesting because both sides will use certain tactics, or all sides will use certain tactics. And it generally seems that one side will use tactics to try and defame or denigrate the opposite side. But then when people point out that it can be used on their own points or on their own sides, they're like, well, no, that doesn't work that way. And it's just, why? Why doesn't it? I think once we get past, because I always try and frame politics like either a religion or a sports team, because that's the way that it seems to be going at the minute. You could use the analogy of a sports team a hell of a lot more if you wanted to, where you have the idea of, right, I'm a conservative, so go Conservatives, go Conservatives. Oh, we're playing the Liberals today. We got to spank them. It's just like, no, surely that you have ideas, they have ideas, and we should work together to implement the best ideas. No, this is a match, this is a fight, and we've got to win. It's like, that's not politics. That's not democracy. That's not the way that any of this goddamn works. But somehow that's the way it's
even
gone.
even if it's a football game that has punches and everything like that, they all afterwards they all go to the pub and have a drink afterwards.
No, it's very, very true. I mean, with politics though, it doesn't go that way, or it doesn't seem to go that way. It doesn't seem to go after we've had our debate, for instance. Not us, but in general with other people. After people have had their debates or chats and things like that, they don't have a conversation afterwards. They don't try and work out what the differences are or have a coming together or an aspect of the stream. They go straight off of the stream and go, well, how did you reckon let's use Sargon of Akkad, for instance, against fucking Spencer. As soon as he finished his debate with Spencer, didn't want to talk to him and try and work out what different ideas and things are like that. Now, I'm not giving credence to Spencer's ideas or anything, but I'm just saying that he didn't do any of that. He went straight off to his own stream and tried to create an echo chamber around him to basically go, did you think that I did all right, guys? Did I do all right? And nobody really challenged him on any of his ideas.
I mean, he's not I don't find him to be a very good debater. He's sort of, because he needs to, because when a lot of people saying, Sargon answered the question.
Yeah.
Somebody asked you, I asked you a fucking question, answer it.
Yeah, no. That's the funny thing with Sargon, especially when I can't spell soccer. Tim, he meant soccer, not football. But then again, Aussie football rules also don't have any pads, because they play it properly. But besides the point. Um, yeah, it's the same thing as what you were saying was that we were saying with Sargon. It doesn't matter what side that certain people seem to go after. I've done the same thing where I've spoken to black nationalists before, and I've gone and spoken to my group to go, did I do all right? I thought that I could have said this, or I could have thought I said that, and nobody really challenged my ideas. Now, no, I'm not trying to say that I'm an amazing debater or anything, because I'm bloody not. But nobody really challenged any of my ideas or said you should have said this or you should have said that or anything else like that. And I didn't really listen to any of his points. But then I always do this, though. I always re-watch the streams or the debates to find out what I could have said and what bits that I missed from his arguments to see if I could understand where his points of view were, or at least where he was coming from more. I don't think that we do that anymore that much. I don't think people do that as such. Like, if I have an argument with somebody on Twitter, for instance, then I'm not going to reread the whole Twitter argument to be able to go, well, I think that this person was coming from this point of view, and maybe I shouldn't have attacked him the way that I did, or maybe I shouldn't have said the way that I did, and so on and so forth. I don't think that we give the benefit of the doubt anymore. We don't give credence to the person's point of view. We just kind of negate them and just say, well, yeah, it's not worth it. At least that's the way that I see that things are going at the minute.
Yeah. So do you actually, is there a case, because I think there are some cases where I just can't, I don't think the conversation can really go any further, because I think we were talking before stream, there was this really hardcore Christian person and they were opposed to, masturbation and, and LGBT things and all this. And it's just, I'm thinking when you're that far, like extreme and you're just so dogmatic, I just think I tend to, and that's my strategy. Sometimes I just got to walk away because there's no good thing coming from that. And I think and sometimes we all have different boundaries. There's certain things that are gonna trigger us off. I really despise being strawmanned or someone assuming my intention. So I have a particular strategy where like I leave the argument and I say, but I still put the weight on them. So I've got a stock response. If somebody's read my tweet and they say, and they've taken offense to it over something really kind of tiny, and then they've said, so you must think this, you must think that. And my response is that I'm responsible for what I've typed, so what my tweet is, and I'm responsible for the words that have come out of my mouth. But the interpretation that you've just put on there, that's your responsibility. So this conversation's over.
No, that's fair enough. No, I mean, I completely I do actually agree with you, actually, to be fair, believe it or not. There are points where you have to say enough's enough. I think if you engage with somebody, as you said, that's at that particular way, then it comes to a point where you can only say, well, why do you think this so often or so much? And if the only response is because my religion, then there's not much of a way if you're going to be able to change that person's point of view. You have to first crumble their identity as their religion first.
And no, I mean, I'm not going to. I mean, it's like you're being asked to play baseball in a tennis court. That's the kind of analogy that that kind of reminds me. It's playing a sport in a place where it's not really you're following their rules, because if he's arguing according to a religious doctrine, then it's we're not playing the same game any longer.
No, I completely not agree. Hello, MC. I don't know if you can hear us or if you've got your microphone set up, but I see you come in, so I've integrated you straight into the chat, so you're ready to chat whenever you want to.
Hello. I assume you guys can hear me now.
I can, yes. Yes, indeed.
How's it going? Did I come in a little bit late? I thought you said...
Yeah, it's only an hour late.
I apologize. I thought that 7 your time was 7 GMT. Are you an hour different from GMT?
No, I am GMT. I'm Greenwich Mean
Now the chat's going off. It's like, oh, hail MC. It's because they don't know, because I'm just some random cunt that nobody really kind of knows.
Oh, I think I know what happened. You guys go through. You guys do.
I love that term.
What do they call it? Daylight savings time, right?
Yes, we do. Yes, we're,
Yes,
we're an hour in front at the minute.
Well, I was looking at the what it was. There's 7 hours difference from Greenwich Mean Time, all right, to Arizona. Arizona though doesn't switch, so it's probably 7 plus the extra 1 because when you guys fell back. I apologize, sir.
No, that's fine. It's not a problem. It is what it is. At least you've actually turned up. I can't say too much for memes, and memes.
Memes is always crazy. This just froze.
It should be okay at the minute. Everything should be fine.
Yep, everything's fine.
That's right. It does seem to do that because it's a web-based program, but it seems to have been working all right so far anyway. So me and Lonely Wolf have been talking quite a while about how we think liberals and conservatives can be friends, but they have to drop the identity politics. It's fine having different ideas or points of view, but not to be entrenched in their own worldviews too much. Would you add to that? I assume you would.
I think that there also is several other factors. Okay, and that is when you say that the identity, it can't be your identity. Your political point of view can't be an identity. It's got to be just a part of who you are. Everyone has multiple likes and dislikes across the spectrum that have literally nothing to do with politics. Food, for example. Yeah. Right. Even little things like discussing. Some people enjoy the argument. Okay, I mean let's be honest. I'm one of them. I enjoy a vigorous debate.
Yep.
Okay. Other people though, they don't, and that's both. I've met people both on the left and the right that are like that they don't want to argue. Okay. So that's that in and of itself is not a defining factor, but it is something that if you find a leftist that likes to argue and you like to argue too, then there's no reason why you can't be a friend. At least friendly with them. Let me put it that way. All right. I mean, where you can put that aside because you understand that that's not the core of who you are, right? If you think that that's what defines you, though, then when somebody says, "Hey, I don't like this," from you from the left, they take it as being personal.
Yeah. And
of course, when you attack people personally, then it's like, then why the hell are you hanging out with me? And why would I hang out with someone that's going to be like that?
No, I completely not agree with you. I think we kind of touched on this before, and I know that you weren't here, so it's interesting that you actually bring that up because we did touch on that, where we think that people put too much stock into their ideologies and form it as their points of worldviews, and it becomes who they are rather than an idea they have.
Right, they've taken it down as part of the core identity, and I think that one of the problems with that is media. Like I shouldn't say media, technology. Let's talk of technology. People are becoming their identities from a technological perspective more so rather than looking at when they meet one another. If they're meeting one another online, they tend to be doing it from, they tend to meet people online that are they've encountered in a chat or something like that in some kind of forum. Right. Now, a lot of us focus on the political style forums, the political kind of, area of YouTube. Okay. So, and that's fine. But what's been happening is bleed over. When you have people going, well, I don't want to hear right-wing talking points about Trump on my knitting channel. Well, then, obviously you're talking politics and knitting. What were people talking politics and knitting for? Why were they doing it?
Yeah.
It may be that somebody just came back with a what I would call an innocuous, comment, but to turn around and go, well, I won't tolerate, and I'll kick everybody out of out of the knitting forum that likes Trump. Well, okay, but another point of commonality that you had with that individual, now you were basically saying is unimportant to you. No, so knitting really isn't that important to you if the fact that there was somebody that said that they voted for Trump in your knitting social and you kicked them.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I do think that it does come a point where I was saying to Lonely Wolf that when I was growing up, I had certain groups of friends because I come from a council estate, or what you would call technically a ghetto in the States. And because I grew up on that sort of an aspect, I worked from the age of 11. So I sort of learned my way of, if I want to get something in my own mind, I have to work for it. Where others would see the opposite. Let's just say that, the opposite. People can have their connotations of that, but would see the opposite. So some people would, from the nurture, would see one way of having a political ideology or the way it would work or align with it. And I've gone the opposite way. But because I've gone the opposite way and I would explain that I think that way's the better way, not too harshly or anything else like that, and just in general conversation, you tend to lose some friends from that. Now, don't get me wrong, they're probably not friends in the first place, but the acquaintances that you did have or people that you grew up with, just because that you have a different opinion on how some sort of form of politics should be. Now, I'm not trying to say that you agree with Nazis and people should agree with you on that or be friends with you on that. That's completely ridiculous. The same thing is the opposite way. But if you just say, well, I think people should work rather than if they can work but don't and get benefits, I don't think that you should lose friendships over that. That's just a different way of, talking, different ideas. But it does seem that just having those different points is enough now to lose friendships.
Yeah, I mean, because on Facebook, that's where you got most of your personal friendships that are there, and I'm always so nervous because I do have, some of my friends are sort of from the left. They're the people I met on the Twitter and the YouTube, and then and some of them even go as far as socialism. Whereas, I've got these sort of right-wing friends because we've met because we have an interest in music and we've gone to, country music concerts together and all that. And so some of them are predominantly conservative. So I'm just sort of thinking, okay, are these two spheres going to collide in some way? And how am I going to deal with that? And I just think, I gave up and I just said, oh, fuck it. Like, I'll probably disappear for a day or two. Just let them have
I will say one thing though, and this is only from my experience. I would love to hear what your experience is, Lonely Wolf, because I imagine yours would be something similar to this, MC. That I've noticed that more right-leaning people are more tolerant of left-leaning people than the opposite way. Though I would love to hear what your opinion is on that, Wolf. Would you think that it's similar, or is that just our own prejudice of experience?
I hate to admit this, but I think there's a somewhat of a guilt by association that does happen in this particular context, not a universal quality, but in the context of let's say that someone on the left, especially if you're in a very tight group, so somebody on the left goes and has a hangout with someone on the right, and they're just talking about stuff that has nothing to do with politics, and it's almost seen as a sign of betrayal to that side, whereas the ones on the right, I don't see it that often in that particular context, and that's really quite a pity that people can't do that, and it's sort of and it usually happens in those groups. I don't get personally affected because it happens to me all the time because I've sort of laid out my boundaries very early. I think that's a very important thing when you've got people who are going to be in your ear, and I've just said, look, if I follow somebody, if I follow their YouTube channel, if I stream with them, that doesn't necessarily mean an endorsement of every one of their political views. Like,
no, of course not.
It has to be there. And I said, I've got the look, and I just pretty much laid out the rules saying, if you try to call me out for having a stream with this person you don't like, then I'm going to tell you to get fucked because.
I wonder who you could be talking about there.
Well, yeah, it could be. I mean, it's a lot of people, and I've just said and I've made videos about that, saying, look, there's a separation between my personal my social spheres when it comes to social media and my political spheres. Like I have streams that are particularly for leftist stuff. If we want to have if we want to have our cabal, and that's fine. But I also use my channels just as a social thing. So there's a lot of different people who can come together, and it's probably got nothing to do with politics. We end up talking about other things, and I just said I don't subscribe to any of that purity testing stuff, and so if you're going to try to shame me for that, then don't bother, because I'm going to tell you.
But I think one of the differences that causes this, all right, is because the left will use it as a purity standard. You don't see people on the right using it as a purity standard. Oh, you're one of them. I can't associate with you if you've talked to a leftist. Now, a lot of that has to do with political correctness and how political correctness came into being. Political correctness came into being to try and stop anybody from having, conversations that they didn't want to listen to, and it was magnified by the mainstream media, at least to a degree, when it was dealing with issues on the left. In other words, they would magnify the kind of shaming that would go on joining the left with that, mainly because the mainstream media has been so left, at least in the United States, for so long. They don't even recognize how far out of the mainstream of the U.S. public that they are. They really do not, for the overall public. And what happened then is that people began to fear. People are afraid. I'm going to lose friends if I find out that you're on the right. Okay, or you're talking to people on the right, or you say a point of view that is outside of, the prescribed view of the left at that current position. All right, if you espouse any kind of normality, I mean, it is a fact. I mean, have you seen anybody get kicked out? All right, like Tim Pool has from his little circle of leftists. Right. I mean, Tim Pool is basically now he feels like he doesn't have a home. He feels like he has no one. He can, no place, because he considers himself a leftist centrist. Right.
Yeah.
Left. He's not as far to the left as the rest of them, and they have basically attacked him. Now, why does that happen? I think a lot of it is because there are bullies, and you learn that there are bullies in real life. I know people don't like this term, but there's people that are verbal bullies, and part of growing up used to be standing up to bullies.
Yeah.
Now, what you have is people going, the bully must not exist. He must not be allowed to exist. Run to the authorities, all right, to handle the bully.
Yeah.
As if somehow they didn't exist.
No, I definitely agree with you that they definitely did exist, and they still do exist. Though, would you say that is a majority of people that are on the left, or is it a very loud minority that is trying to control, should we say, a narrative? Not the narrative, but a narrative.
How do you tell the difference?
The difference is obviously if everybody is actually saying exactly the same, or is it just a smallish group of loud people?
Go ahead.
I think it's a very loud sort of people who are very, and those people are very sort of insecure, and some of those people are. I'm not convinced that, and that's the problem with left or right politics. I'm not convinced that people. I'm convinced there's an awful lot of people who don't really care about politics, or I think there's a lot of feminists who don't care about women or whatever, because I think it's for them it's a performance art, or somewhere, because unfortunately there are movements like that that will draw people with certain tendencies, like sociopathic tendencies or narcissistic tendencies. That's a breeding ground for that type of neurosis, and Twitter is a very good storage places for all of those kind of moldy neuroses that people have. So that's another wrinkle that's added, is that to tell a difference between someone who's there because they genuinely care about the cause, or are they just projecting some of their own psychological problems onto the.
Yeah, but my question, the reason I asked the question was very specific. Not are they that way, But how do you tell the difference?
By engaging.
All right. But there becomes the problem. You don't, when somebody doesn't want to engage with you on the left, okay, you don't know if it's because they're so browbeaten that they can't be talked to, all right, or if they're because they're so insecure, or if they're one of those bullies that knows that they can't bully you and just doesn't want to deal with you.
Sure, and there's definitely going to be people that do all three, but there's also going to be people that just don't want to have the discourse in the first place.
Well, right, but they want to have friends. The ones that are insecure and still want to have friends, what they'll do, all right, is they'll join the mob. Okay, so so that's why I said, how are you going to know the difference? And if they do try to talk, what happens? The bullies will shame them back into line.
I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm just saying that I
mean,
don't
on
think
Twitter,
it's a good idea to say that they're all the same, or even try to. I know you're not, but try to hint that they're the same.
But how do you? The question is how do you fix it though? I'm looking further down the line, probably a little too far. All right, saying how can you engage when they won't engage? How can you when you say this is one of the reasons why I'm so vociferous with voice and I tease them a lot when I say all leftists, and the reason for that is because in a democracy, all right, or a democratic type of society, which we have democratic type societies for the most part. Yeah. You elect those leaders. So who are those leaders? Are those leaders the kind of bullies that you're talking about, or are they not? When you talk about the left, and when you look at that and you say, well, these are the people you're voting for, you have to take from the standpoint that these are the people they wanted to represent them. These are the people that they are taking and saying, okay, this is who I identify with. You can say, yeah, I don't always agree.
Sure.
And if you, from our political standpoint, meaning the United States, well, the way we look at it is that those people reside for most purposes, all right, in the House of Congress, right, in the legislative branch. Well, who dominates the legislative branch from a left perspective in the United States? Well, right now it's Nancy Pelosi. All right, Nancy Pelosi is about as far left as you can absolutely get, and yes, she is one of those bullies that wants to shut down speech whenever it doesn't suit her viewpoint. She's one of the people who accused the Tea Party, right, of using the quote unquote N word, all right, when they were speaking on the steps of Congress and they were being heckled, something that they hadn't seen. I don't think Pelosi had ever seen that, and there's video of it, and people have said, "Look, I'll give you $100,000 if you can give me the video where you can show me somebody saying that." Nobody ever said it, but she accused it. That's why I'm pointing out that she's one of the bullies.
Oh, no, I agree. I agree that some of the leaders, or in fact, most of the political leaders, are probably going to be the bullies. But that doesn't mean that people that are on a left or are trans or are this or are that are going to be that way. You could say the same thing about Trump because he's the most vocalized and most opposing, and in his own aspect is going to be the person that is the most loudest. Then he's going to be heard the most. It doesn't mean that his policies are the best, same as Nancy Pelosi's and, but that doesn't mean that he or she is representative of everybody that's following.
Well, I disagree with that in this regard. Once again, in legislature, you choose your representatives.
Sure, but you can only choose what's put in front of you.
Nancy Pelosi, just like John Boehner, before he left and everything, was chosen, all right, to be there as a representative of the people. That's specifically what her role is.
Sure.
Right? I mean, it's not the only part of it. I mean, the legislature, etc. All right.
Yeah.
So for people to say no, for you to say no, that the other people just voted for her, they're not necessarily like that. What's the difference? If you're going to vote for these people to represent you, then you have to be okay with that type of representation.
It depends on the fact of how much of a percentage that you would actually follow those people. You can only vote for what's in front of you. If I have a choice between somebody that's a communist and a socialist on both sides, then I'm always going to choose the socialist. If I've got somebody that's a socialist and a capitalist, I'm going to choose the capitalist. I can only vote for who's put in front of me.
Well, you for your set of priorities, yes. Everyone has a certain set of priorities. Okay.
Sure, but even with those sets of priorities, if the priorities are still not met, even 100% or even 50%, you're still going to go with a candidate that meets more of those categories than anything else.
Yeah,
because no one candidate is ever going to meet 100% of your categories.
No, of course not. I mean, you won't, even if you get elected to that office, you're not going to meet 100% of those categories because you're going to sacrifice some of the lower priorities under certain conditions,
sure.
Right? Depending upon how things go. We all understand that. Okay. However, when you're dealing with trying to talk to people and you're trying to engage in the debate, how can you engage in the debate? You're not allowed to engage into the debate. Now, on YouTube, we are. Don't misunderstand me. All right. For the longest time, though, you couldn't engage in a debate because the gatekeepers were the mainstream media.
Sure. I'm not arguing that they're not.
And the mainstream media, all right, is not open and fair for debate. They pick and choose on how they're going to do a debate and who they're going to do the debate with. If you have an eloquent speaker on one side, they will not look for the eloquent speaker on the other side. They'll look for the guy that probably is either a clown or barely speak his own name,
sure.
Right? And that's the person that they're going to have show us the debate.
No, I completely not agree. And the reason why they do that is to make the person look better than what they already are and make the other side look worse than what they are. But that's done by the fact of people actually putting that on. That doesn't mean that those are the people that represent them.
Well, but it's also the people. Then it's the responsibility of the people, right, to understand who the media is, right? And once again, this is another problem that you have on the left is that a leftist who isn't quote unquote like you said, the bully, all right, who doesn't want to try and jam their views on them, still have to have the intestinal fortitude to stand up, to their own people on the left. If they don't, then as far as I'm concerned, there is no difference because when it comes right down to it, they will act and do things the same way. They will act with a mob mentality.
Can I put down an analogy then? It's going to be an extreme analogy, so don't take it as me thinking.
Well, before you do that, Lone Wolf, you're going to say something? I'm sorry for interrupting.
Oh no, I'm kind of listening to what's happening here. This is interesting.
Oh, okay. I apologize. No, go ahead, then, CSG. Fire away.
I will. But what you seem to be saying is using this as an analogy that because there's somebody that's committing a murder, that if I see the committing of the murder and I don't do anything against that murderer, then I'm the same as the murderer and I support what the murderer is doing.
Okay, you're going beyond that. That's not quite a good analogy.
Okay.
What a better analogy along those lines would be if you see a guy doing a murder, right? You know that he's a murderer. Not only are you silent about it, but you're willing to say, "Well, he still represents me." You're not willing to go to the cops. You're not willing to do this. You're going to look at the murder. You make excuses for the murderer, saying the excuse, well, that person did this and this to him, so I understand it. So that's why I didn't go to the cops and tell anybody about it.
Okay, let's go with that. Do you think that there's a lot of people that do that on their side or our side even, or whatever side?
I think that there's some of that's going to go happen no matter what, but it's always going to be concentrated on the left because the mainstream media, all right, allows that to happen and are duplicitous enough to actually engage in that activity themselves for people on the left, but they won't on the right. In other words, they're holding the right's feet to the fire like the media is supposed to be doing, but they're not on the left.
No, I completely get that. Does that mean that you have, I'm just trying to listen to what you're saying and understand it and repeat it back. Does that mean that you're trying to suggest that you have more of a problem with the way that the media is instigating the level of discourse or the way that it's interpreting it, rather than how people actually act?
Well, when you say how do people actually act, if they're doing something that I find offensive, then I'm going to say something about it. But
I meant a generalization. But no,
my biggest bugaboo is the media. It always has
That's
been.
fair
All right. I mean, it's they've always been, and for so long, you've seen how they've been. All right, for the longest time. All right. Within the United States obviously is not like, and I'm hoping I'm not making a mistake here by getting people the wrong opinion of when I talk about left and right. I understand it from my perspective. This is not the European perspective of left and right, because the definitions they're not
the same.
exact, right? They're not, to an extent you can say they're equivalent, but they're not really. All right.
No,
There's a whole there's a real bifurcation there when I speak of some of these things.
Yeah,
right?
An American conservative is nowhere near the same, or as an English conservative is nowhere near as conservative as an American conservative. The English conservatives are just conservative by name.
Well, I think that an English conservative still has an aristocratic type of a mindset overlay to an extent.
Possibly.
Right?
Possibly.
And that's different, because that overlay really doesn't exist in the U.S. really, in any kind of shape, because we were never defined that way.
Yeah.
Okay. We define things from a monetary perspective specifically. When they talk about middle class, they talk about how much you earn. They don't give a shit where you came from. It has nothing to do with your dad was born a plumber, or your dad grew up on the south side of Chicago, or he grew up in the Ritz-Carlton. Okay, if you're middle class, it's because you make this amount of money. Not that you came from wealth, or not that you came from the dredge, the dredges or the trenches. Okay, so it's different in that respect. Okay, which is why I'm trying. I don't want people to misunderstand what I'm saying. When I talk about the dominance of the left, though, the media, the mainstream media's dominance of the left began with mass media, began with radio.
Sure.
All right. And the reason for that, I think, is much more due to the entertainment factor within the media. Okay. Entertainment, being entertaining, having to be entertaining, all right, is an important aspect of the news, just like it is anywhere else. But when people are reading the news, they're looking for just specific facts generally. Okay, yes, I'm not ignoring yellow journalism, that yellow journalism didn't exist, because obviously it did throughout history. But at the time, you had both sides engaging in this. In the United States, however, with mass media communication, you didn't have that. Now, why didn't you have that? You didn't have it for one reason and one reason only, and that's government interference.
Sure. Can I just quickly point? Can I quickly ask you a question? Do you think that the reason why should we say the right, or the right in itself at this moment in time, do you think that that's the reason why the right has slightly, should we say, created a fight back with the point of social media? Because, as you said, normal media doesn't seem to be able to, or legacy media doesn't seem to want to have the same level of interaction from left or right. So do you think the people are actually going to social media and internet to be able to understand where the right's argumentations are coming from? And say, for instance, the way that me and Lonely Wolf were talking earlier, and realizing that they're not as bad as the media has made out. The right, obviously not.
I think that's an aspect of that. I think what you had was social media is a place where people on the right, especially the ones that want to fight, right, or enjoy the argument or have the discussion, right, they found a home there. They said, hey, we can actually get out my points of view. I don't have to be represented by George Will or Donald Trump or Rush Limbaugh. I'm going to speak my mind on how I see these issues, and I don't necessarily agree with everything that they say, or this is my point of view on how I want to to bring this out. And so of course, social media allows what was created for so that people could talk to other people, but then they found out that there's a broader, wider world out there, and they also found out, I think, because of the disassociated nature of the media, that people learned that maybe their quote unquote friends who hadn't been talking out were speaking in a different mindset because they were being overruled or they were being overshadowed. And what that has caused is people to create alignment shifts, saying, okay, well, I agree with this person, or I don't agree with that person. I agree with this or that. And people, I mean, you've seen it. People have ended friendships over social media. I mean, I've seen it. I've seen all sorts of craziness happen on social media. I saw one of my wife's friends from, she's known since college days, right? 30 years. And she basically told my wife recently that the reason she wasn't talking to her or hadn't called her in a month was because she was so upset about Trump in some of his policies, right? And my wife is like, okay, I won't beat you up then, which, okay, I can understand that. But then at that point, I looked at my wife and I told her, I said, that's why she's a leftist, because she can't handle someone telling her she's not an adult. Now, is that a bit excessive? Yeah. Was I being a bit mean? Yeah. Because I don't particularly like this girl. All right, I'm not one of her good fans.
No, that's fair enough. I do think that even though we've been able to have this back and forth, I do think that we've kind of gone to what could be the actual, should we say, crux of what me and Lonely Wolf were talking about before. The way in which, should we say, in this aspect, and using it as an example, I do think that there's other outliers as well. But how the media has portrayed how the right think and how the right do this and how the right do that, I do think that, as you said, MC, I do think that it has put in, should we say, an alienation, a form of prejudice, a form of already, should we say, pre-thinking of how somebody, or pre-descriptor of how somebody on a right or right-leaning would already think. And I think that's the level that has actually stopped the discourse. But I do think, as we've come along on our little circle of talking, that social media itself seems to have been shifting the Overton window again, slowly, but seems to be shifting it back towards the centre again, because it is dispelling what the media itself, in my opinion, and yours, MC, seems to actually have been trying to portray the right as the boogeyman, so to speak.
Well, I think
just one second though, MC. I would really like to hear what Lonely Wolf thinks on that aspect, and see if he thinks that me and MC are onto something here, or if he has a completely different view, if that's okay.
Yeah, because I think what happens is there's kind of a third subculture, because that's what the sort of extremists, like, what they don't understand is that the majority of people are sort of clustered around it, because it's kind of a bell-shaped distribution. So the majority of people are clustered around a sort of a not necessarily the center, but they're clustered around a place that's a little bit more pragmatic. So even if there's people who have left ideals, like with me, most of my leftism is sort of related more to it's sort of like economic type things. And then we're clustered around a place where we want to bring it back to being a little bit more pragmatic and just common sense sort of conclusions and argumentation. And it's a huge and it's a bigger group, and I think we underestimate the size of what we are, because I think the ones who are really the very puritanical in their beliefs and very entrenched in their beliefs, I think they're way too small to have too much power. So I think the internet's really galvanized a sort of third wing. Like, I'm not saying that we're centrist, but it's galvanized a group of people who traditionally probably would have argued a lot, but they're finding they have a little bit more in common. And I think that there are going to be a lot of us who will just move forward with the conversation, and we want to move it to the next phase. And unfortunately, all the neurotic sort of people who are they're just going to be I see them getting left behind in the long term.
Do you think that that's should we say, what me and MC were trying to get around, which was that the prejudice that was already predicated by the media or other aspects? Do you think that that's the reason why people already had the bad preconceptions beforehand, and how it's now changing with the social interactions?
I think the media, as hard as they try to sort of have a narrative, and I think there is a fear, because it's the danger of suppressing the conversations. The conversations we're sort of having at the moment, that's really a threat to the sort of status quo that's been sort of set up by the elite media and the politicians, etc. And the less we have these conversations, then the more likely it is that it's obviously out of intimidation and fear. But unfortunately, like the most honest person of the most honest moment of your life is where you actually go into the voting booth, because that's the time where nobody's watching you, and you're going to tick who you think's, and that's why it ends up being such a shock. Because I saw it in Australia when the Labor Party lost, because all the polling data was showing that oh yeah, this side is going to win. The left side is going to win. And I think that was because of the sort of suppression of just the conversations and the oppositions and, the back and forth, because that was being sort of suppressed in a lot of ways. And then because of that, all of a sudden it becomes a shock to the system when they think, oh, hang on, people don't really think this way at all. So as I said before, the most honest moment of a man's life is when he's in that little booth where he ticks the box, because nobody's watching, and that's where the truth comes out. So I think, if anything, the suppression of the truth is the result of the kind of control over conversation.
No, I completely not agree with that. I think you as well, MC, would say something very similar to how you were talking before.
Well, I wanted to, I agree with that completely, but I also want to add to the fact that what you're seeing, though, from the mainstream media now, overall, is when people talk about this quote-unquote lurch to the left, okay, first of all, I don't necessarily believe that. But aside from that, a lot of it is because look at how the media is reacting to this. Right? Look at how the media has, more than any other group, gone off the rails. What they were doing before, a lot of the shenanigans that they could do, all right, were basically not being called out because there was no place to out that. All right, social media broke that. All right, and that I think is where a lot of the conversation starts to begin, because people are pointing out, okay, this guy says this. Well, did he really say it? Here are the actual words, and you put the actual words out there, and that's when you get the conversations where, oh, I thought he said this.
Yeah.
Now we're in the second stage of that. You're seeing the reaction of the media now, going, okay, we're being called out on our BS now. What was their response? They went further that way. They started doing these kind of actions even more, expecting them not to get called out. And they then, in turn, start putting pressure on their buddies, right? Specifically the buddies in Silicon Valley and so forth, saying, if you're supposed to be on the left, if you're supposed to be helping us move the ball forward on the left, what are you doing to help us move this? It looks like you're being taken over by the right. Do something about this. So how did they respond? Well, quite frankly, they responded in a typical fashion. Okay, well, if we're losing the argument, we must limit the argument to those who are not effective on the right, and the left. Okay, in other words, they're going to promote the people who are effective on the left. They're going to try and get rid of the bigger groups on the right that have a following and at least have a well-spoken way of doing things, to try and bring it back to what they had before.
No,
I mean, that narrative.
I mean, I do completely not agree with you. I do think that that's something that is going on. But I suppose what we could be asking is the censorship of the internet more important than the actual way that the media is portraying it? The reason why I asked that to both of you is because I kind of know where MC would answer, but I'll obviously let him answer rather than putting words in his mouth. But I would presume that the fact of how we've seen, should we say, the Overton window shift from social media or social interactions on the internet, that the now perceived and probable, and in my opinion, actual censorship on the internet is actually a bigger threat than mainstream media ever was anyway. If you wouldn't mind answering first, and then we'll pass it on to Lonely.
Oh, okay. I was waiting for you, Lonely. Sorry about that. No, okay. The problem with the censorship is who's doing the censoring? It's the government, right? Because the government is, whether we like it or not, the backbone of the internet, all right, is still controlled for all intents and purposes by the government. And so when you start seeing these rules being applied, they're being applied from a governmental standpoint, and they're being policed from a governmental standpoint. All right. Even in the United States, while we aren't as censorious in certain regards, all right, the pressure is still being applied, all right, from the governmental forces. And this was typical simply because when there was a limited amount of space, right? When I talk about the left dominating the country from the mass media standpoint, and I said that it had to do with the government. It had to do with the government because at the time when mass media came into existence, okay, it was a finite. There were certain things that were a finite resource. In this case, bandwidth. In the case that we're talking about here was bandwidth. All right, radio was fairly new, but bandwidth and how to establish areas of bandwidth had to be managed somehow. And of course, it's airwaves, so can't be managed locally. It had to be managed more on a more broad-based scale. And at that same time, you had World War II. Okay, so both of those things coming together is what led to the government basically getting in bed with the mainstream media and becoming mainstream media elements. People didn't recognize this. And it's not, when I talk about the government, I'm not talking about this elected official, that president, or that elected official, all right, and that Secretary of State. I'm talking about the government overall, the bureaucracy. And and that has had the effect, all right, of really tamping this down. Now, that lasted until their elected officials said, you know what, we've had enough of this, and we're going to put in a reduction of this mass media consumption. All right, we're going to open these things up. And the first one that they did in the United States is they went after the telecom. They went after AT&T, and they broke up AT&T as a monopoly. Okay, the second one was when they basically came in and said AM radio. All right, we're going to just open it up because it was a dying medium in the United States within AM radio. No one was listening to AM radio. We'll just release it back to local control. Once that happened, you had large other audiences start to develop, all right, quite rapidly in those areas. And then, of course, you have the internet, which people said, hey, we can get information from here. And we can get it directly. I can start reading these things directly as to what's going on, and I can see what's going on. And of course, people then realized, well, the AP would say X, Y, Z, and I'm not bashing the AP. I'm just using them as an example. Or CNN says, look at this report, and they put this report out there, and a guy says, well, wait a minute here. I was there. That's not what I saw. In fact, I've got it on my phone. Here's what really happened. And that's where the chaos really started to spread.
I know. I mean, I completely agree. I mean, I think my question was more to the point of simplicities rather than going into specifics. All I was meaning was, do you think that social media in itself is now being censored to stop the shift back to the political right, should we say, or bringing people closer together?
Well, I think the government is trying to retake control.
Fair enough.
Because they were comfortable where things were at. The bureaucracies, the stability of the bureaucracies were comfortable where they were at, and they don't like not being in control anymore.
Sure. What about you then, Mr. Lonely Wolf?
Yeah, because it's the whole idea, because I think there is sort of a thing like that, because there are a lot of narratives that are going on, because it comes back to that, so what was it? It was Steven Crowder, and that was kind of a canary in the coal mine. It's one thing to sort of, because there's two separate conversations. Obviously, like the way that he spoke, it was in very bad taste, so he shouldn't have done that. But at the same time, the magnitude of the way that it was dealt with, it was sort of out of proportion, and it seemed like there was a cynical reason. Like it was sort of like it almost seemed like it was a lot of things were lining up at the same time. And so it was almost an excuse to say, okay, let's, stamp down on social media or whatever. And it seems to be a collusion between, some of these sort of larger YouTube influencers as well as the mainstream media or whatever. And we saw a lot of people, lose their channels or whatever. So it does seem like there's a threat to the conversation. But the reason that I oppose that sort of thing is, I think it's antithetical to anything progressive, because I stand for a lot of progressive values, and I think it's actually causing my side a lot of harm to be doing that, because I think that we would have been a lot more progressive had we been honest, because we need to get to the truth of what people really think, even if we don't like them, because the only way that we're going to change minds and to reconcile differences and even promote our own sort of leftist agenda is we need to know where people are at, because that's my strategy. So if I'm sort of debating somebody about a political position, then I need to know where you're at the moment, no matter what the issue is. And if that's kind of being suppressed in a way that if I don't know where you're at, then that's going to really derail any sort of meaningful conversation in which I could have possibly changed your mind if I wasn't arguing in such bad faith. And so, as I said before, like once we get to the polling booths or whatever, or into the voting booths where you sort of have the freedom, that anonymity, where nobody can police, your speech or whatever, and you can sit there and you tick the box. And then when the outcome, it turns out that, we're more right wing than what we thought. And that's really, and if the left sees the right as sort of such a threat or whatever, then, it's like surely the public has a right to know the political pulse of the country that they're living in. Like that's the most important thing to know, is what is the current pulse? Okay, where is everybody at? And only from there can we actually kind of challenge whatever the views are. And if we want to move towards the left or whatever, so that's my personal agenda, is that I want us to move back towards the left again. But we can't do that if we don't know what the right is thinking, and if that's being suppressed, and if we're not meeting people where they are, if we don't know what people are really thinking by the attempt to suppress speech, then we're actually working against our best interests.
No, I mean, I completely agree with most part, apart from the point of getting to the left. I suppose I would be slightly different in that aspect, where I would say, I don't want to move towards the right. I don't want to move towards the left. I want to move towards what's factually true. I don't want to be based on my opinion of what's right or what's left. I want to go down what's actually true and what's factual. But, I mean, I'm not trying to take you out of context. I'm just saying that's the way I want to go.
Yeah, that's just my own personal.
No, that's fair enough. So I think that we could probably all agree on one thing, and I am assuming this. But I think we could agree on one thing. I do think that the censorship on social media will stop political discourse or discourse in general, to make people realize that somebody that has a different view to you has it for a reason. And maybe we should understand those reasons before we go off and have prejudgments about why they think that. I think we could all agree on that.
Yeah, I mean, for me to so for a leftist to understand because I think the best way to debate someone who's more on the right than I am is because, like, firstly, I have to understand, where they're coming from. So what is the reason they think the way they do? And I want to explore every part of their sort of ideology, like why they think the way they do. And that's the only way, because, it's a direct connection. And the only way that I'm ever going to be persuasive to maybe see my side of things is, it may not happen. It may happen. It may not happen. But, I've got more of a chance of doing that if I know what your reasons are. And for me to actually ascertain, what your reasons are for holding a particular view that I might not like or agree with, then I've got more of a chance of actually presenting more persuasive argument. Whereas, if I've misunderstood your motives because of the restriction or whatever of the free exchange of ideas. So if we don't have this sort of platform where we can talk the way we are, then that undermines that whole process.
No, that's fair enough. What about UNC?
I think you're right in saying that it's going to kill the political debate. Right? If they keep pushing censorship, they're going to try and kill. It's going to kill political debate. All right, people won't debate. People won't go on. For no other reason, because they're banned.
Yeah.
All right, and they're being prevented, and then that in and of itself is a scary term. Okay, when you try and kick people off of a platform, is it a publisher or is it a platform?
Yeah.
And everyone keeps asking the same question with YouTube, at least here in the U.S. Right? Is it a publisher or is it a platform? I personally think they should be considered a platform, and they should be prevented from being a publisher. But that's just my own viewpoint. But you are right. You cannot. discuss something, all right, without engaging the other individual. You cannot move your ball forward, all right, or your policy forward, okay, without having some kind of engagement, at least in a representative type of society. So that becomes a question in of itself. There are people in this country that don't want us to be a representative style to society. And I think a lot of people have forgotten that.
No, I completely agree with you. I do think that the way that we, as the whole point of the stream was, I do think that the way that we bridge a divide, I don't want people to go off and hold hand in hand and whatnot, but I do think that the divide in itself is more of a fact that we don't listen to each other's points of views. I think that the right and the left both go, well, you're a conservative, you're a liberal, you're a leftist, therefore I don't want to talk to you. I think social media has forced people to listen to the opposite side and has not, as MC said, through media, has not pushed a narrative. The narrative has been set by the individuals that are talking. And again, to point MC as well, the ones that are actually talking are the ones that are bridging the divide. The ones that are not talking are forcing them apart. And I think you can talk to honest actors and talk to dishonest actors. But the more we talk to people that are actually willing, the more we understand that we have more that binds us together than pulls us apart.
Yeah, it's going to be hard. I think because there's a mentality of 2015 where it was the SJWs versus the anti-SJWs. I can kind of understand why somebody would be reluctant to be on the stage and debate with Sargon. Like, even though some of the people who did do that, especially the MythCon, where they weren't really equipped to deal with that, because it's less of a political conversation, and when we're dealing with that sort of those large personalities, we're dealing with a very large fan base, and and people who are there because it's more of a they're not necessarily taking him seriously. It's more of a lolcow sort of thing. So, when you hear people cheering and saying, "Oh, look at this," SJW got wrecked or whatever, like that's something that I want us to get away from. So it's probably in future times, like hopefully the larger channels are sort of the people that are getting engaged who are representative of the so-called who might have once been the anti-SJWs or maybe more towards the right or whatever. That there's a bit more pragmatism behind that and less of a sort of personality cult, because it seems like let's say that I wanted to have a debate with Sargon about like something or other, and then it goes beyond a topic of conversation. It goes into sort of pride and personality, and also it's more of a circus really when you got all these people in the audience who they might not be there for the right reasons to listen to an exchange of ideas and something that's cerebral. Like they might be
there for the blood sports.
Like the audience, a lot of them are probably there because it's sort of like an entertainment type show to them.
Sure, but I mean, even for the people, in my opinion, even for the people that go there for the entertainment value, even if they're going there just to watch a good dumpster fire, they're still going to be exposed to other people's points of views. And they will probably be more tolerant of other people's points of views because they've heard it before than what they would be if they weren't exposed to it.
Well, I agree with you, but at the same time, there's so much chaff. And what I mean by that is there's so many people, right, that are not discussing ideas, that are not talking about ideas. They're talking about what they've heard. They're just regurgitating. They're just soundbite people. They just regurgitate sound bites. All right. And everyone does that to an extent. All right. When it comes to YouTube, for one reason and one reason only, because it's effective. All right. A soundbite, a well-placed soundbite at a specific point in time is actually very effective. It's actually a good tool for expressing what you're trying to express. All right. And it contains a lot of an emotional context. So people, and this becomes a problem because when you have a discussion, when you're having a legitimate discussion on ideas, okay, most people can take their on either side can take out, when they're having that type of discussion, they can take out their emotional context with it. All right. However, this medium is about emotion. All right. A visual medium is about emotion, right? To some degree, right? To try and get people's emotions engaged, to get them to listen. All right. So as a problem with that becomes, okay, so if you're approaching this from an emotional context, did you let your emotions go in there, or is this are you just trying to spread drama, or are you just presenting it in a dramatic fashion? It's to people too often let it get, they forget where they're at from that perspective. They forget that, okay, they're talking, this person's not talking emotionally, this person's actually producing a lot of facts. I ran into this with memes when I have arguments with memes, where I rapid fire with a lot of heat in my voice, all right, various different factors, all right, that have happened in the past, all right, but that, to be honest, is more because of how I was doing the content than it was with the discussion itself. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
And that's really where one of my failings actually is because that just happens to be how I approach things. I'm more of a drama queen than I want to
admit. I think we all can be. I'm definitely one of those people that could be classified, especially when something's not going particularly my way. I think I could classify myself as a drama queen.
I mean, it's a way of it. See, and that's another thing though that becomes a problem, because as human beings, we connect emotionally as well. All right. So it's a natural way of beginning conversations is to create an emotional context or overlay within which to have that discussion.
No, you're definitely correct. Because if you have, if your first emotional connection is as one of distrust, dishonesty, or a prejudgment of, should we say, identity, then you're not going to broach that conversation in honesty. You're always going to have a form of standoffishness in that conversation. Where if you don't know the identity, for instance, then you don't have that prejudgment, and then the emotional connection, as you said, MC, is then of one of immediacy. In other words, well, that person said hello, how are you? They seem nice.
Yeah, exactly.
What about you, Lonely Wolf? What do you think about that aspect, about the idea of emotional connections for conversations?
I think it's a good start, because the minute because even though I'm not a fan of Sargon, it's just that I don't know. I could.
He's a good example to use.
Not all of his ideas. It just doesn't work for me. It's just the whole branding is just more of it becomes more of a circus. Because when I look at those debates, and I was watching the MythCon debate where he sort of people in the audience cheering for whatever, and it seems a little bit more like a circus. But at the same time, I think the person who was debating him, what was his name? Thomas Smith. It was MythCon.
Yeah, Thomas Smith. Yeah.
His name was Thomas or something like that.
Yeah, Thomas Smith.
The tone that he set for that argument was very, very bad. Like I would never, if I wanted to push back against his ideas, like that is the worst. Like from the very beginning, it was met with sort of a hostility, and so there's no point. You may as well not bother, because if it's just going to turn into a shit show, then don't bother. But when it usually, because my personal strategy, if there's something that I sort of disagree with somebody on, then obviously it's important to establish a rapport if you're having a discussion, and that's really, you're appealing to a common humanity.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. It's generally when I'm having conversations with people that I know I'm going to disagree with, I will try and organize, or somebody I've never met before, I would generally try and organize to have them come on half an hour before the due time, so we can have a little bit of time of just back and forth, just a little bit of a laugh, not talking about any subject, just so that we can broach it on an idea of mutual understanding, rather than it being, well, you're right, I'm left, or I'm slightly left, you're very far right, whatever. Not from that aspect, but from the aspect of we're going to have a conversation and there's no underpinning behind it. At least that's the way I try and do it.
Yeah, I mean that's when I see with those news interviews how sort of loaded they are, but then they end up shooting themselves in the foot anyway, because they know, because people can see right through that. And usually you may have the network itself has its agenda, but the general public, and that's the joy of the internet, because I think one of the moments where they really exposed themselves was sort of Jordan Peterson. I'm not a big, I find him a bit boring, but because I tried reading.
I do like Jordan Peterson, but as soon as he starts talking about the aspect of God, I wish that he would actually just be honest with himself and just say that he's a Christian, rather than just saying that he believes in
and
that
he's
or
too much.
whatnot.
And he's a bit of it. Like, for the amount of time that he decries postmodernism, he absolutely, like, everything that he speaks like sounds very postmodern to me. Like, based on the stuff that I've known, like,
Isn't he Canadian?
Yes, he is. Yes.
Canadian.
Then what else can you expect?
I mean,
True.
it's always sweating.
It's a joke, folks. It's a joke.
But I just remember the interview, how it became a meme, saying, so what you're saying is, and that's what happens when you come into an interview with, number one, you got a chip on your shoulder, number two, you've got an attitude, and number three, like, you're already trying to set the narrative before then. Like, a conversation needs to be organic. It needs to develop very naturally and organically, and you have to be open to hearing something that you don't expect to hear. And what I saw someone, like, that was probably the worst interview that I've ever seen, and that's why it became a meme. And
well, I think it became a meme because those kind of interviews normally wouldn't be seen. They would be cut. If they were seen at all, they would be cut and edited, all right, to such a degree that it would be more or less milquetoast at most.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I completely and utterly agree with both of your points there. I do think that, as we've kind of alluded to, I think that if we are to bridge this kind of gap, and I'm not trying to say that the three of us are going to fucking do that, I'm not that deluded, but if we were going to start a conversation about how to bridge the gap, my suggestion would be the same as probably MC's. Keep social media completely open as it is, and have more centrist or right-leaning TV shows and TV stations coming up, because you need to have all sides to be able to understand what's going on and realize that you shouldn't demonize other people's points of view because they're different. Well, I think we can agree with that.
That's very true. I mean, I think one of the byproducts of with the 2015 mentality, where it was because it's easy enough to say, okay, let's have a conversation, but when let's say it's someone like let's say it's Undoomed or something like that, who's sort of, he's one of those people that I found really repugnant, just because of the tone that is used in the way that he's responded to those videos. It's very like, it's almost a bit of a straw man that he uses sometimes, and there's no addressing that, and it's the repeating of the same insults over and over again. And then when you got the followers kind of, going to that channel, I mean, that has to be discouraged in order to encourage an open community, because that really goes against the spirit of the free exchange of ideas. And then sometimes when it comes to I guess to the audience themselves, they have a responsibility to themselves. Like, it's not I don't blame the content creators for doing that. That's where I differ from a lot of people. Like, I think the audience has to hold themselves responsible, and sometimes they need to shut the fuck up and listen. Like, when they're in like a especially if it's a very, very large stream or something like that, when it's a debate or something like that, and they're sort of sitting there just they're just typing, all this shit, attack helicopter, I'm an attack like those sort of people aren't really helping. We just got to recognize that those people don't really have much to add to that conversation. So I think that like that past behavior of kind of putting a very, very, very abrupt and kind of a very mean-spirited sort of response video, and then the sort of I guess that dogpiling by the same sort of comments over and over again. It's a bit of an NPC type approach that's there, but I think that does go against the spirit of the free exchange of ideas. So there's somewhat of a sort of hypocrisy that I hear from the kind of the kind of Saga Knights, where it's like, debate me, like the free exchange of ideas, but that's not going to happen when the tone has been set where there's sort of an ad hom or whatever, and when there's a channel that sort of couldn't really deal with that level of vitriol.
Well, then what you're doing is what you're saying there quite frankly, a bit patronizing. So somebody can't handle it, so that they're going to shy away from the debate.
I think that, I mean, they can. I think a lot of them would handle themselves, but it's when it's like the responses are not really arguments; they're just at home saying, you're a cunt, you're a faggot, all of that sort of thing.
Okay, yeah, I understand. I understand when it devolves into
it's really
shouting match. I understand that, but my point was though is you have if you're going to go on, you have to be willing to take that. You have to be willing to take that risk. You got to go in with an adult attitude of saying, I'm willing to go in here knowing that it could turn into, that kind of a shit show. Now, that's not saying that you want to drag it into that point, right?
No,
that's not saying that you're looking for it. All right. I don't think that's the way to do that. And if I think those channels, like what do you call it? Like the Tonkasaw channels, internet blood sport. Those channels exist because they're popular. Okay, if it's going to be internet blood sport, that should be a genre in and of itself. Right? Yeah. If people want to go into that's fine. I personally shied away from those because, quite frankly, I was like, "What do you guys? You're just throwing insults at one another. It's like schoolyard stuff," which is another aspect of the media that we have to understand. Is you're letting teens and people who aren't adults, all right, and you're giving them a forum to act out as if like they're on the playground.
Mm. I do honestly think that the more the left, right, center, communist, capitalist were able to speak to each other without the prejudice of the identity as the forefront, I do honestly think that would bridge more gaps. Now, I'm not trying to say that I think that a communist and a capitalist are ever going to agree on anything, but at least that they would be able to understand where the, should we say, ideas are stemming from, the reasons behind it, rather than just going, they're evil or they're this or they're that. And that's on both sides.
I think one of the arguments I framed before is probably poorly worded. I'm sort of thinking about instances where, okay, I think let's say that there's sort of there's two progressive, they're having a conversation, and then the chat gets spammed. Like I remember there was one where there's these YouTubers that got together saying, okay, spam this message, and then it was like this, and this. But then there were people within the chat who were sort of hidden, who were trying to have a conversation and engage. Even though that's not a case of censorship, it's like I sort of think that sort of behavior of sort of spamming a chat section or something like that.
It's a form of modern day shouting down someone. So
it's really a Trigglypuff. It's a modern day Triggly. It's not censorship in itself, but it's against the spirit of free exchange.
Well, it's a form of censorship. I mean, it's a bit more aggressive, but it is a form of censorship when you go out of your way to try and prevent the other person from speaking their mind. So it's a form of censorship. If you get together with a group of 30 people, for example, and show up at some political rally somewhere, and you start yelling at the speaker who's there to prevent him from speaking, you are trying to deny him from speaking. All right, it is a form of censoring his speech. Now, it's not government censorship. It's not censorship in the form of government, but it's a way of trying to shut somebody up. It's the same thing as political correctness in a way. In a way, it is a form of political correctness.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll bring up all that 2015 stuff just to say that, moving forward, like there was a lot of key mistakes that were made by the so-called, my culture wars from, I guess, 2015, and I think the marketplace of ideas really got distorted by the elevation of certain characters who really didn't deserve such a large following. So, for example, let's say that I think it was misguided to make so many videos about, let's say, someone, Anita Sarkeesian, who's very, like, her content's pretty unimpressive. She's pretty vacuous. But I think the consequence was that, she made a shit ton of money.
Yeah.
She became popular, but then the same thing can be said for the like, let's say Milo Yiannopoulos or Jordan Peterson, even the provocateurs. Like I've listened to Milo and I've never really heard anything really that impressive. I found him a bit sort of vacuous, but the problem was, like, with the screeching of the protesters or whatever, that just becomes a reason you sort of think, oh, if people are screeching about that, maybe it's funny, you know, because I enjoy. It's a guilty pleasure to watch that sort of shit show or whatever.
Well, let's be honest. I mean, you always had that kind of guilty pleasure from society now and then, from people now and then, right? Yeah. Andrew Dice Clay, for all intents and purposes, became very popular as a flash in the pan comic. If you guys remember him, but he's just basically an
effect.
You know, I mean, it was more of the effect of you know, childlike, you know, humor, you know, utilizing words. But how long did it last? It didn't last very long, and then people moved on. All right, so you have that aspect now creeping more into, you know, the social media realm, but that's, I think, is just going to a natural aspect of the type of form that we're in.
Yeah, so I think that when it comes to both sides, I think it needs to be it'll be good if we tempered the by all means. I think it's good to present ideas saying, okay, this is my counterpoint to Milo. This is why I think that is incorrect, in a very logical. It's not an attempt to tone police, but it's just saying that, you know, we've got to learn our lesson that unintentionally from both sides we've elevated so many figures who really are not that impressive.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. But I think that the reason why people elevate those figures is because that they like a straw man. They like to put somebody up there that represents all of these people, and that way that they can then beat it like a piñata. I think everybody on every side likes to do that, because my side's better than yours because
we don't have a Trigglypuff.
exactly that. Yes. Though you could argue that Sargon is similar to that, but yeah, whatever.
Well, but that exists strictly within this realm.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist, and that's fine. I have no problem with that. The problem, of course, is there is no counterbalance still to the mainstream media.
I wouldn't say, I'd agree with you in principle. There isn't a general counterbalance, because even with YouTube and social media as it is, it doesn't actually counterbalance. It's where it's where people go to find their balance. It's not a counterbalance.
It's not a counterbalance. It's not a counterbalance yet.
Yeah.
I mean, this is part of the evolution of where we're going with this, and so that's why people are very hyper defensive. All right, when it comes to censorship on the right, people on the right are very, very keen about censorship because they were locked out for so long of the mainstream media. Right, so you have a much broader, I think, age coalition involved, where you have young people and older people on the right, are still very sensitive to it. Whereas on the left, it's still a young man's game to a large extent.
No, I agree. I mean, most activists are always going to be more of a younger person because they have more of idealism, in my opinion, that they can change things and they have the chance to. It's why you see a lot of people on YouTube and themselves that are politically active are generally younger people. Though I do understand that our average age is probably close to 90, if I'm adding up right.
Yeah, it's really, unfortunately, I think socialism itself, because I don't go for socialism itself. Like, I'm sort of a mixed economy type of person. Probably more of a social democrat. I'd probably classify myself as. But the problem with the socialist ideology. The problem with the socialist ideology, or going like for the full Marxism, is it makes a lot of assumptions. It's a little bit too optimistic about human nature, and I think we can't forget. It's like the 7 deadly sins. I think they're distributed amongst the left and right. There are certain vices that our sides have, and I'd probably they're spread across things like that. I'd probably say for the right wing, probably, I guess, sort of money in itself, that might be a bit of a vice for some people like that. And it's also people on the left, but that's probably, but the biggest thing on the left, the biggest vice or the sin that we have is that of power or envy. Like that's our 2 deadly sins of the left side is probably envy and anger. Those are our 2 sins. And unfortunately, that sort of hunger for power, that's kind of a human thing. So whenever you create an anarchist situation like that, or you think you want to set up something that's sort of like a communist society or whatever. It's like there's an underestimation for the tendency to want to seize power, and that's how those type of that's how we get the Soviet Russia. I mean, because the socialists can say, oh, but that wasn't real socialism, like Soviet Russia, that wasn't real socialism, but it was the same narrative. Like, we're going to be repeating the same mistake, because it may start off with a Marxist playbook, so there may be a vision that's going across, but the reality is probably going to turn into that, because it gets corrupted by the need for power. And I'm kind of seeing that with certainly some of those people who are identifying as libertarian socialists. Like, I do see, I am seeing an authoritative tendency that manifests itself in some of those places. So that's why I'm a little skeptical.
Well, you're seeing a dynamic that's always going to appear within any society, regardless of where that society or how large that society is, and that is within a social structure. To some degree, you have to suppress individuality on the edges. Okay, you're going to come back and create areas where the people are saying these are standards of behavior that we're all going to agree are in common in order to have the society as a whole. All right, so it's the push for, grabbing of power and everything is a natural consequence of the social aspect of humanity.
Yeah, it's I don't think, and then some people think, well, the power and everything, that's a byproduct of capitalism. And it's a very naive assumption about human that if we reconfigure society, then all those particular the sins and the certain tendencies we have that are very negative, that those things will magically disappear. But I have to reject that notion.
Well, a lot of things, we're human beings. A lot of traits that we have, the traits that we have, we've evolved with. Okay, we've evolved these traits both socially and on a DNA level or biological level. All right, because it's how we came to be, where we're at today, regardless of where we were. So when you take a look at things like arrogance, you take a look at things like pride. We'll talk about this, 7 deadly sins. Okay, pride, arrogance, sloth. They're all a part of who we are, just taken to an extreme. Okay, but they're also things that actually are good. Okay, this is sound kind of crazy, but sloth motivates people. Don't believe me? Why do we have vacuum cleaners? Yeah. Because somebody wanted to clean the floors faster and easier. All right, it's because they wanted to relax more. All right, so from that dynamic, that's why we have vacuum cleaners. All right,
I've never thought of that before. That's such an interesting thought. I've never.
So it's when it's taken to the extreme or begins to consume you that it evolves a negative aspect of it. All right, pride's the same way. Pride turns into arrogance. Arrogance can be expounded to the point where I'm never wrong. All right, very easily.
Sorry, when you started to say pride turns into arrogance and arrogance turns into anger, I always thought you were going to go into and that leads to the dark side.
I exist on the dark side. Come to me. The thing, it's all a part of who we are. All these people talk about negative emotions and positive emotions. I've always rejected that. All right, and the reason for that is because an emotion is an emotion. All right, you have to understand the context in which within which it exists. Now, this is one of my biggest bugaboos: is emotions are fine, but they have to be controlled by intellect. You have to be able to rein in, regardless of what that emotion is. You have to be able to rein it in with intellect. Because if you release it and you allow that emotion to go out of control without your intellect being able to subsume it, bad things are going to happen. And it doesn't matter what that emotion is. It doesn't matter if it's anger. It doesn't matter if it's sadness. Right? It doesn't. If you allow, or even happiness. Okay. Happiness leads to giddiness, which leads to frivolousness to the point where next thing you know, you're falling off a cliff, going, "Oops, I went too far." Because you were just dancing and not caring about what your situation, where you were within the situation. You can point to any emotion and see that if it isn't controlled by intellect, it can get out of control. You know, that's one of the reasons why people, especially men, all right, are told control your emotions more. Why? Because there's so many more things that can lead to disasters if it's not in control. The control set has to be deeper. Why? A man is physically more powerful than a woman. If he allows his emotions to take control, hitting another guy may not do anything, but hitting another woman, you could actually kill somebody.
Yeah. I suppose on that note, we have been going for almost 2 hours. Well, over 2 hours. I think that's almost a perfect point to actually end on. That don't let your emotions actually dwell in yourself when you're talking to people. Separate your emotions, realize that they have an opinion, they have a point of view, and try to engage as best as you can. Now, if they don't want to engage, then fair enough. If you don't, then fair enough. But if you are going to engage on a good note, on an honest note. I'm going to leave with Lonely Wolf having a final word first, then MC having a final word, and then I'll tell everybody to fuck off.
Okay, so thank you for everyone listening to me, because I know that I'm probably one of the poor, I'm one of the oppressed minorities. It's like the few leftists, because even the but I'm not sure about the chat. Like maybe there's other leftists, but you know. So thank you for having me, and for the people in the comments for sort of listening to me and having me. So I hope you enjoyed listening to my thoughts.
Yeah, no, do you want to show your channel on all or anything else like that?
Yeah, so obviously subscribe to Lonely Wolf 1980. So if you enjoy, I do a little bit of political commentary, and you know I often show off my bird. I have a cockatiel, so sometimes she appears in my videos. So if you like birds, you'll love my channel.
I love a bird.
Mostly music covers.
Sorry.
You want a cockatiel now? Is that what you're saying?
Oh, I love a cockatoo. Yeah, sorry. If I cut you off, Lonely Wolf, I'm sorry. If you finish them, I'll pass on. If not,
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, yeah, MC, go ahead. Obviously, same thing.
I obviously I do have a channel, but I want to first of all apologize for being late. It was not intentional. I honestly thought that it was different. That happens, I guess, with the time zones being what they are. So I apologize to both of you about that. For that, no, I appreciate you having me. You know, as people notice when I do my streams, my own personal streams, I'm a lot more bombastic and aggressive. All right, but I have no problem with which is actually having a conversation either. So. I do appreciate you giving me the chance to come out here and talk.
No, I appreciate that. And yeah, go and sub to MC. He does some very interesting stories. And I do mean that honestly. Because some of the stories that he does cover are not stories that are really covered properly at all by most people. And he does most of the stories around the world as well, or in areas of interest. So go and sub to MC because he's very interesting if you haven't already. But that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to bid you farewell. I am going to bid you adieu. And I will speak to you all again real soon. Goodbye for now, guys. Take care.
Bye-bye.